A quiet realization begins to take shape in moments you would normally ignore. Not during something important, not in a crisis, but in the middle of something ordinary. You are speaking to someone, responding as you usually do, following the flow of the conversation, and suddenly, something interrupts the continuity. Not externally, internally. A brief awareness appears. You notice yourself speaking. Not what you are saying, but the fact that you are saying it. And for a second, it feels unfamiliar, almost as if you are observing your own behavior from a slight distance. The words continue. The conversation does not stop, but your experience of it changes. You are no longer fully inside it. You are watching it happen. At first, this moment passes quickly. You return to the conversation. You continue as usual, but something has shifted. You have seen something that was previously invisible, and once you see it, it tends to come back, in different situations, at unexpected times. You begin to notice how often your behavior unfolds without deliberate intention. The same phrases appear. The same reactions follow similar triggers. The same decisions emerge in familiar patterns. And what once felt spontaneous starts to feel structured, not rigid, but organized in a way that suggests repetition. You may start recognizing this in your daily routines. How you move through tasks without fully thinking about them. How your attention shifts automatically from one thing to another. How your responses in certain situations feel almost predetermined, as if they have been rehearsed over time. But what makes this experience different is not the pattern itself. It is the awareness of it. You are no longer completely inside the movement. You are seeing it as it happens. And this creates a strange contrast. Part of you is still acting. Another part is observing the action, and the two are not fully synchronized. You might notice this most clearly in moments where you react quickly. Someone says something, and your response appears almost instantly. But this time, you catch it, not before it happens, but as it happens. You see the reaction forming. You feel it moving through you, and for a brief moment, there is a gap, a sense that the reaction is not entirely chosen. It is happening, and you are aware of it. This awareness can feel subtle at first, but it becomes more pronounced over time. You begin to notice how much of your behavior is driven by patterns you did not consciously create, patterns shaped by repetition, by past experiences, by learned responses that have become automatic. And the more you observe this, the more a question begins to form. How much of what I do is actually chosen? This question does not necessarily produce immediate answers, but it changes how you look at your own actions. You start to see your life not only as a series of decisions, but as a series of patterns, some of them useful, some of them limiting, but all of them operating with a certain degree of independence. You may notice this when you try to do something differently, to respond in a new way, to break a familiar habit, and instead of changing easily, the old pattern reappears, almost automatically, even when you are aware of it, even when you intend to do something else. This can be surprising, because it reveals something important. Awareness does not immediately override the pattern. You can see it and still follow it. This creates a different kind of experience. You are no longer unconscious of your behavior, but you are not fully in control of it either. And this space between awareness and action becomes more noticeable. You may begin to feel it in everyday situations. When you reach for your phone without thinking. When you respond in a conversation the same way you always have. When you make decisions that feel familiar, even if they are not fully aligned. Each time, there's a moment where you recognize a pattern, not as an idea, but as something happening in real time. And this recognition changes the experience. You are no longer simply living your life. You are observing how it unfolds. And that observation creates a subtle shift. You begin to question the sense of continuity you once took for granted. The idea that your actions are always the result of conscious choice. Because now, you can see the automatic layer beneath it. The part of you that moves without asking, that reacts without consulting, that follows established paths without needing direction. This realization can feel disorienting, not because something is wrong, but because something has become visible that was always there. You are beginning to see the structure behind your behavior, and once you see it, it is difficult to return to the previous sense of simplicity, where everything felt intentional, where your actions felt fully yours. Now there is a distinction between what you do and how it happens, and that distinction marks the beginning of something deeper, not a problem, but a shift, a moment where your relationship with yourself begins to change. Because you are no longer only acting, you are becoming aware of the one who acts. What you are beginning to notice is not new behavior. It is the structure that has always been there. Carl Jung approached this with a level of clarity that can feel almost unsettling once you recognize it. He understood that the majority of human behavior is not directed by conscious intention, but by unconscious patterns that operate continuously in the background. These patterns are not random. They are organized, formed over time through repetition, experience, and adaptation. And once they are established, they do not require your attention to function. They run on their own. This is why your behavior can feel automatic, not because you are passive, but because the structure behind your actions has already been built. Jung described the unconscious as an active system, not a passive container. It is constantly influencing perception, emotion, and behavior, shaping how you respond to situations without requiring conscious input. When you encounter a familiar situation, the response does not need to be created from scratch. It is already there, prepared, ready to unfold. This is what you're starting to see. The response appears quickly because it has been repeated many times before. It has become efficient, refined, automatic, and this efficiency is useful. It allows you to function without needing to analyze every action. Without it, even simple decisions will become overwhelming. But this efficiency comes with a cost. It reduces flexibility. Because the more a pattern is reinforced, the more likely it is to repeat itself in similar situations, even when it is no longer fully appropriate, even when you are aware of it. This is why awareness alone does not immediately change behavior. The pattern exists at a different level. It is not only a thought. It is embedded in the way your psyche organizes experience. Jung referred to these patterns as complexes, not in the casual sense of the word, but as structured clusters of emotional and behavioral responses that operate semi-independently within the psyche. A complex is not simply an idea. It is a system. It contains memories, emotions, associations, and once activated, it influences your behavior automatically. For example, in a conversation that touches on a sensitive area, a complex may be triggered. The reaction appears quickly. You feel it. You express it. And only afterward do you become fully aware of what happened. Even if you recognize the pattern, the initial reaction still occurs, because the complex operates faster than conscious thought. This is what creates the sense of autopilot. You are present, but the response is already in motion. Jung emphasized that this does not mean you lack control entirely. It means that control is not located where you initially believed it to be. It is not in the immediate reaction. It is in how you relate to the reaction once it appears. But before that becomes possible, something else has to happen. You have to see the pattern clearly, not as an abstract idea, but as something that unfolds in real time. And this is exactly what you are beginning to experience. The awareness that your behavior is structured, that it follows certain pathways, that it is not created fresh in every moment. This awareness can feel destabilizing because it challenges a fundamental assumption, the belief that you are fully directing your actions. But Jung did not see this as a loss. He saw it as the beginning of consciousness, because until you see the pattern, you are fully inside it. It directs your behavior, and you experience its choice. Once you see it, the relationship changes. The pattern is still there, but you are no longer completely identified with it. You can observe it. You can recognize when it is active. And this creates the possibility of differentiation, the separation between the observer and the pattern, between the ego and the unconscious structure. This is a crucial step in individuation, but it is also where the process becomes more demanding, because seeing the pattern is not the same as changing it. You may notice that even after recognizing a pattern, it continues to operate. You still respond in familiar ways. You still follow established paths. And this can feel frustrating, because awareness has not yet translated into change. But this is exactly what Jung expected. He understood that the unconscious does not reorganize itself instantly. It resists change, not out of opposition, but out of stability. The patterns that exist have been reinforced over time. They are efficient, they are reliable, and they do not dissolve simply because you understand them. This is why individuation is not a sudden transformation. It is a gradual process of bringing unconscious material into awareness and relating to it differently. The key shift is not immediate control. It is recognition. The moment where you are no longer fully absorbed in the pattern, where you can see it as something that happens rather than something you are. And this distinction, while subtle, is fundamental because it introduces a new possibility, not to eliminate the pattern instantly, but to interrupt its inevitability, to begin creating space between stimulus and response, between what happens and how it continues. This space is small at first, almost insignificant, but it is where everything changes, because within that space, something new could emerge, not automatically, but intentionally, and that is where the process begins to move forward. At some point, the question stops being theoretical. It is no longer about understanding how patterns work. It becomes about what happens in the exact moment they appear, because that is where everything shifts. Not before, not after, in the moment itself. You begin to notice something very specific. The pattern does not arrive fully formed. It unfolds. There is a trigger. A reaction begins. A familiar movement starts to take shape. And for a brief moment, you are aware of it while it is happening. Not analyzing it, not explaining it. Simply aware. That moment is small, almost easy to miss. But it is the only place where change becomes possible. Before, the pattern would complete itself without interruption. Now there is a gap, a pause, not long enough to stop everything immediately, but enough to see what is about to happen. And once you see it, something changes. The pattern is no longer invisible. It is no longer something that simply happens to you. It becomes something you are witnessing. This does not mean you can stop it instantly. Most of the time, the reaction still continues. You still say the same thing. You still follow the same behavior. But now, you are aware of it as it unfolds. And that awareness alters the experience. You are no longer fully inside the automatic movement. You are present within it. And this is where the process begins. Not by forcing a different action, but by staying with the awareness long enough for it to deepen. Over time, that small gap becomes more noticeable. What was once a fraction of a second becomes a clearer pause, a moment where you recognize the pattern before it fully takes over. And within that pause, something new becomes possible. Not a perfect response, not an immediate transformation, but a slight deviation, a different tone, a delayed reaction, a decision to not follow the pattern all the way through. These changes are small, but they are not insignificant, because they introduce variation into something that was previously fixed, and variation is what allows the structure to change. Carl Jung did not describe transformation as a sudden replacement of behavior. He saw it as a gradual reorganization of the psyche. The old patterns do not disappear overnight. They weaken as new ways of responding begin to emerge. And those new responses are built in these small moments. Moments where you act differently, even slightly. Moments where you do not complete the automatic sequence. You may notice this in very simple situations. A reaction that would normally escalate, but stops halfway. A habit that begins, but is not fully carried out. A thought that appears, but is not followed. Each of these moments creates a shift, not because they are dramatic, but because they are real. They occur within the pattern itself. And that is what makes them effective. This also changes how you experience control. Before, control meant try and stop the pattern entirely, to eliminate it, to replace it with something better. Now, control becomes something more subtle. It is not about stopping everything at once. It is about influencing the direction of what is already happening. You're no longer trying to override the unconscious completely. You are interacting with it, participating in it, allowing awareness to shape how the pattern unfolds. This creates a different kind of relationship with yourself. Less confrontational, less forceful, more attentive. You begin to trust the process of awareness itself. not as something that instantly solves everything, but as something that gradually changes the structure. The more consistently you remain aware in these moments, the more the patterns begin to lose their rigidity. They become less predictable, less automatic, more open to variation. And this is where life starts to feel different, not because everything has changed, but because your participation has changed. You're no longer moving entirely on autopilot. You are involved, present, aware of what is happening as it happens. And this awareness creates a sense of continuity, not the continuity of repeating the same patterns, but the continuity of being present within them. You begin to feel less like something is happening to you and more like you are part of the process. Even when the patterns are still there, even when the reactions still occur, there's a difference. You see them, and because you see them, they do not define you in the same way. This is where the automatic life begins to loosen, not through force, but through attention, through repeated moments of awareness that gradually reshape how you act. And over time, those moments accumulate. They form a new pattern, not one that replaces the old immediately, but one that grows alongside it, until eventually the balance shifts and what was once automatic becomes something you can choose. At some point, the realization settles in a way that feels different, not as a thought, not as something you analyze, but as something you can no longer ignore. You begin to see that much of your life has been unfolding on its own, not because you were absent, but because the patterns were already in place. They carried you. They guided your reactions, your decisions, your routines. And for a long time, that felt natural. It felt like you. But now, something has changed. You are no longer completely inside that movement. You can see it. And that changes your position entirely. Carl Jung once pointed out that until something unconscious becomes conscious, it directs your life while you believe you are choosing. What you are experiencing now is the moment where that direction becomes visible. Not fully, not completely, but enough to recognize it. And that recognition is not a small thing. It means you are no longer fully identified with the pattern. You are aware of it, and awareness introduces something that was not there before, a possibility, not the guarantee of change, but the possibility of it. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot return to complete unconsciousness. You may still follow it. You may still repeat it, but you will know, and that knowing creates a different kind of experience. You are no longer living entirely on autopilot. You are observing the autopilot as it operates. And that observation, even when it feels subtle, is where everything begins to shift. This does not mean your life suddenly becomes controlled. It does not mean every action becomes intentional, but it means something has started, a process that moves slowly, quietly, often without dramatic changes, but with increasing clarity. You begin to notice more, not only in your actions, but in the moments before them, in the small pauses, in the beginnings of reactions, in the places where something could unfold differently. And those moments matter, because that is where your participation begins, not by controlling everything, but by being present enough to influence something. Before we close, take a moment to look at something very simple. Think about one action you repeated today without thinking, a response, a habit, a decision that felt automatic. Now ask yourself, did you notice it while it was happening, or only after? That difference is where the shift is taking place, because the more you notice in the moment, the less automatic it becomes. If this resonates, write in the comments one pattern you started noticing in yourself recently. Not to change it immediately, just to see it clearly. And if you know someone who feels like they are moving through life without fully understanding why things keep repeating, share this video with them. Because sometimes the first real step is not changing anything. It is realizing how much has been happening without you seeing it.